soldier, freshly discharged from the military, encountered a little girl who wouldn't stop crying, then fainted in his arms. He froze when he realized she was his biological daughter. But the girl didn't recognize him. How had they grown so distant? His left shoelace had come undone for the third time since he stepped off the bus. Michael Whitmore bent down, his hands trembling, not because of the weather, but because of the dryness in his throat. The laces were worn, the tongue of the shoe frayed, and they no longer fit the way they had during patrols. He tightened the knot, slowly stood up, and kept walking forward without looking back. The stone steps led him toward the central market of Maple Ridge, the town where he once ran wild as a sunburned, noisy teenager who never imagined war. He wasn't looking for anyone, nor did he expect to be recognized. At 42, a returning soldier wanted only to breathe in silence, no flowers, no banners, and certainly no hollow applause from those who would never understand what he'd lived through. The market was packed. Shoppers elbowed past vendors, voices shouting over the scent of fried bread, instant coffee, and the heat of midday pressing through the faded canvas awnings. Michael walked slowly. His hand brushed against the strap of his backpack, where his army insignia still hung, tucked next to a crumpled photo from 10 years ago. A young woman holding a newborn baby. Her face had faded, but that silhouette, unforgettable. A murmuring voice rose ahead. A small crowd had formed a semicircle around a sweetbread stand on the left side of the market. Michael hadn't intended to stop, but something in the air slowed his pace, then made him pick up speed. "That girl again. She hasn't eaten all day, and now she's out here performing," screeched a short, stout woman with a twisted headscarf, her hands planted on her hips. At her feet, a little girl about 6 years old was hunched over, clutching her stomach, unmoving. Noticing the girl was about the same age as his daughter would be, Michael pushed through the crowd and knelt to see her. She was crying silently, her body painfully thin, dress filthy, bare feet covered in mud and scrapes. Her left hand clutched an empty plastic bag, while her right hand shielded her chest as if fending off the world. When her eyes met Michael's, she whispered, "Please help me," before fainting instantly. Michael gently picked her up. Her tangled hair revealed a dark bruise behind her ear, shaped like an uneven star tilted to the left. His heart skipped a beat that no one could hear. He couldn't be wrong. "Emily," he murmured, unsure if he even heard himself. The girl didn't open her eyes. Her body was limp. Her breath barely had any strength left in it. Michael tightened his arms around her. He stood up, holding her close to his chest, and walked away without waiting for any questions or explanations from the murmuring crowd behind him. Someone shouted, "Hey, where are you taking that girl?" Michael didn't answer. His footsteps, heavy at first, had turned into a run. A girl fainting from hunger didn't need excuses. She needed to survive. The private clinic of Dr. Evelyn Cole was tucked in an alley behind the old church. The metal door had barely swung open when she gasped at the sight of her old high school classmate, his face stiff from dust and wind, carrying a girl as light as a wet bird. What happened to her? Michael didn't answer right away. He just handed her over, his eyes wetter than even he could understand. "I think it's Emily." The doctor looked at him, her eyes trembling for a second. Then she began checking the girl's vital signs while calling for the nurse. No one asked how he knew her name. At that moment, the only urgent thing was to make sure that small heart didn't stop beating. Emily was placed on a stretcher in the corner of the room. The doctor started an IV drip. Michael leaned against the wall and said nothing for nearly an hour. He didn't look directly at her, but he didn't move either. When the heart monitor finally started picking up a steady rhythm, he reached for his wallet and slowly pulled out an old, faded photograph. In it, a baby wrapped in a white blanket slept in a woman's arms. Her right hand clutched the hand of a man whose face was barely at the edge of the frame. Michael traced the edge of the photo and paused on the baby's face. It was the same face, only now the round cheeks were gone, replaced by a pale exhaustion. Some pain doesn't need names. It just waits for the right moment, the right person, to finally break the silence it's been wrapped in for years. Emily slept through the night. Dr. Evelyn Cole suggested that Michael take a rest, but he refused. He didn't explain why. He simply took off his coat, propped his foot on a chair, leaned his head against the wall and stared at the corner of the room where the girl was sleeping. When the clock struck 3, Emily stirred slightly. Her eyelids fluttered. She mumbled something unintelligible, then drifted back to sleep. Michael took a deep breath. In the dim light, his eyes remained fixed on the girl. The name Emily, which he had carried with reverence throughout his years of service, was now real. It was no longer a dream that had been taken from him. At dawn, the first light filtered through the curtain. Emily moved again. He stood up and walked to the bed. "Can you hear me?" he asked in a hoarse voice, as if he had forgotten how to shape words. Emily didn't open her eyes, but her chest rose and fell. Her breathing was steady. Michael leaned closer, studying her delicate forehead, sunken cheeks, and slender chin. It was the same face, 10 years ago. Only now, a chasm had opened between them. A chasm of time, of misunderstandings, and of a promise left unfulfilled. Some reunions don't need coincidences. They come when one person has learned how to wait, and the other has nothing left to lose. At that moment, Michael placed his hand on the edge of the bed and whispered, almost to himself, "Daddy's home." The first sound Emily heard wasn't a siren or a scream like in the neighborhoods where she had once slept on the streets. It was the sound of a spoon tapping against porcelain. A small sound, but one that echoed like the ragged breath of a soul accustomed to hunger. "I don't want to eat." His voice was even and low, as if he had expected a harsh reaction. But instead of a scolding, a gentle voice replied, "That's okay. When you're hungry, you can eat whatever you want." Dr. Cole placed the bowl of oatmeal on the table and said nothing more. She stood there for a while, not too close, not too far, careful not to overwhelm the girl. Emily didn't look at her. Her gaze remained fixed on the small window to the left, where the pale light crept in, brighter than any light she'd ever seen under a broken roof. She didn't ask where she was. She didn't need to. What she wanted to know was, why was she here? "The person who brought me here, she's a cop, right?" Dr. Cole paused, then shook her head. "No, she's a good person. I don't remember anything. I just remember being hungry, then darkness, then cold." Dr. Cole didn't answer. She gently adjusted the thermometer. At that moment, she could clearly feel the girl's skin trembling, not from fever, but from fear that had become instinct. She bent down and lifted the leg of Emily's old pants, revealing a pale, old scar on her calf. Long, rough, as if it were a deep wound that had taken too long to heal. "And this? What happened to you?" "A chair. It had nails in it. I slipped. The woman at the shelter said it was my fault. No one treated it. I used a dish towel to wrap it. The blood took days to dry." From the hallway, Michael could hear the conversation. He closed his eyes. His hand gripped the edge of the chair until his knuckles turned white. That small story, to him, felt like a punch to the chest. "They're gonna send me to a children's shelter, aren't they?" Dr. Cole stopped. "Who told you that?" "At the places I've been to. They said if no one adopts you, they send you to a shelter. You're not allowed to cry there. You're not allowed to remember anyone. If you cry, they lock you up alone. If you ask too many questions, they hit you." Emily spoke without looking at the doctor. She only clutched the edge of the bedsheet, as if reminding herself of the rules. "You're in a clinic. No one's taking you anywhere. A clinic might also just be a temporary stop before they take me away." This time, Dr. Cole didn't answer. She simply placed a gentle hand on the girl's frail shoulder and said nothing. Then she quietly left the room. There are some children whom adults cannot comfort right away. They need time to learn what trust means. Michael sat alone at the small table. The yellow glow from the lamp couldn't dispel the darkness in his eyes. In front of him lay an old necklace, a photo, yellowed with age. A newborn, eyes closed, clutching her hand tightly from that very moment. "Forgive me," his voice broke. "I thought I was fighting for a just cause. But what reason could be greater than holding your daughter on the night she's burning with fever?" A young nurse passed by, saw him, and paused for a moment. She said nothing. She simply walked the other way. In that little clinic, everyone knew about the man who had spent the night speaking to no one, holding a necklace, whispering into the silence. Near midnight, Emily woke to the sound of footsteps. She didn't cry. She just sat up without turning on the light. The clinic was so quiet that even opening the door was enough to hear the click. She stepped into the hallway. The light came from the kitchen. Emily pressed herself against the wall. And then she saw him. Michael stirred a cup of cold coffee without drinking it. Next to it sat a small blue tin box with chipped paint along the edges. He opened the box and pulled out a few old sheets of paper and an aged birthday card that read, "To my daughter, Emily, your daddy's little girl." The words had faded, but it was clear they had been cherished. "You've grown, and I've become small in the shadow of missing you." He didn't know if anyone was listening. Emily held her breath. She didn't understand everything, but she recognized that voice, that warm, steady tone, something that felt like the kind of dreams she still sometimes had. But she returned to her room, leaving no trace. The next morning, when Dr. Evelyn brought in the tray of oatmeal, she was surprised to see that more than half of the bowl from the night before was gone. Emily lay on her side, eyes closed, her face no longer carrying the alertness it had yesterday. "Did you eat last night?" "Yes. I thought that if I didn't eat, I'd grow weak, and if I got weak, no one would want me to stay." "No one is going to send you away from here. But if he comes back and sees I ate the oatmeal, will he get angry?" The doctor didn't understand right away. She sat down beside her and spoke softly. "The man who brought you here only asked one thing. Is the girl warm? So? He's not a police officer?" "No, he came from very far away just to bring you here." Emily sat up and, for the first time, picked up the spoon and took another bite. She grimaced at the cold oatmeal, but she didn't say a word. "Your name is Emily, right?" "Yes, but in a lot of places, they just call me Sweetie or Little One. My name doesn't seem to matter. Here, your name matters. Everyone deserves to be called by their name," said Dr. Eveling, as she gently squeezed the girl's small, snow-cold hand. Outside the clinic, Michael was watering plants with an older nurse. He didn't turn around when he heard the soft laughter from inside. He only looked up at the sky. Some children don't need candy or promises. They just need permission to exist without having to hide out of fear of being abandoned. Michael had not yet been called Dad, but he knew that to hear a little girl call you that, first you have to learn how to stay. You don't walk away. That afternoon, the wind blew down from the mountains into the town of Maple Ridge, carrying the scent of damp wood and ash. The old sapote tree in front of Dr. Evelyn Cole's clinic rustled slightly under the slanting sunlight. The town seemed to hold its breath between two seasons, and just as everything appeared still, a knock came at the door. It wasn't loud, but it was the kind of knock that warned anyone with experience. Evelyn left her notebook open on the desk, adjusted her shawl, and walked to the door. She didn't open it right away. Through the window pane, she caught a glimpse of a woman dressed elegantly, with a firm posture, squared shoulders, and brown hair neatly tied in a military-style bun. Beside her stood a tall man, his eyes shadowed as if hiding an incomplete truth. Behind them, a young girl clutched a small purse. Evelyn cracked the door just enough to reveal her face. "Good afternoon, I'm Rachel Langston," the woman said with an inquisitive tone. "I heard there's a girl who was rescued here. I need to make sure she's not my daughter." Evelyn didn't smile. "I'm afraid I can't help you. I'm responsible for protecting the privacy of all minors, even if adults believe they have the right." Rachel hesitated, then leaned slightly forward and lowered her voice. "I just want to see her. I won't interfere with anything." "I'm sorry. No one here deserves to be treated like an object that once belonged to someone else." The man beside her stepped forward, trying to speak, but Evelyn's steady gaze stopped him. The air grew tense, like a rope about to snap. At that moment, the girl who had come with Rachel looked up and whispered something that seemed to freeze the air. "Mom, why are you leaving her behind again?" Rachel clutched her daughter's hand tightly. The man pressed his lips together. "Children have such vivid imaginations," he muttered, then turned and walked away without saying another word. Evelyn watched them leave for a long moment. Her eyes held no anger, only a familiar sadness, the kind of sorrow known only by those who have witnessed too many things that never should have happened, to children who never even had the chance to decide whom to trust. That night, Michael Whitmore sat quietly at the entrance of his home, his back leaning against the old wooden post, and an oil lamp flickered on the table in front of him. Emily played in the yard with a black cat that had shown up a few days before. Every now and then she looked up and smiled. That smile tugged at his heart in a strange way, as if an invisible thread was pulling him back to a moment years ago when a small hand had also reached for him with that same look in its eyes. Dr. Evelyn walked into the yard without knocking. "Do you know who they were?" she asked. Michael didn't answer right away. He quietly poured himself another cup of tea. "Rachel Langston. She's been investigated 3 times for child abuse, all dismissed because of money and connections. This time won't be so easy, Michael. If you really want to keep the girl, you're going to have to face it." Michael set the cup down. "I'm just a stranger, a man who made mistakes and doesn't feel he has the right to be called a father." You can't hide forever behind regret. Some children just need someone who won't leave them. The next day, Michael visited Mr. Thomas Granger, the shoemaker who lived behind his house. After a few pleasantries, he asked to rent a small room in the garden so Emily could stay. Mr. Granger didn't ask many questions. He looked at Michael with the eyes of someone who had seen war. "As long as the girl feels safe, it's fine." The room had been cleaned, with new curtains and a simple rug. Emily stepped in, her eyes wide, still unable to believe this could be her place. "You can draw, read, or be quiet all day if you like," Michael said. "You don't have to call me anything. I just want you to feel this is a place to stay, not a place you'll be sent away from." Emily gave a faint smile. A little while later, she took out a notebook and used an old pencil to sketch a quick drawing. She handed it to Michael. In the picture was a low house with a large tree in front of it. Under its shade were 2 figures, a man wearing a military hat and a curly-haired girl. "Who are they?" Michael asked quietly. "I'm not sure. I dreamed it." He was standing in strong wind, but he didn't leave. "As if he was waiting," Emily replied. Michael swallowed hard. He had never told her he used to be a soldier. But memories don't always need words. They can come alive even in the trembling lines of a pencil. That night, Ashley Bennett, the daughter of the neighbor who sold tamales, came to visit. She brought some bread and an old wooden monkey. Emily accepted the gift without a word and invited her to sit down. "Where's your dad?" Ashley asked curiously. "I don't have a dad. My mom said he left before I could talk." Michael listened from the doorway. He quietly watched the 2 girls playing. In the dim light, Emily's face glowed as if she had never known suffering. But he knew pain doesn't always show where people can see it. That night, after Emily had gone to sleep, Michael sat in front of the old mirror and began shaving. His hand stopped halfway when he saw his reflection. Tired eyes, full of guilt. But there was something new in them. Something he couldn't name. He opened the drawer and took out an old yellowed document. It was a birth certificate, with his name printed in the father box. "I didn't have the courage to stay that day," he whispered, "but this time, I won't let you go." The scent of cinnamon tea still lingered faintly in the air. On the wooden table, the tablecloth was spotless, but the slices of toast from that morning sat cold and quiet, like silent witnesses to something about to unfold. Michael wiped his hands on his pants just as the doorbell rang. No one in the house shouted or rushed to answer it. Only the solid sound of his footsteps echoed on the stone tiles, each step heavier than the last. Outside the gate stood Rachel Langston. Her hair was slightly wavy and she wore a wine-red fitted dress. Next to her was a man Michael didn't know, Richard Keller, his hair perfectly combed, his eyes scanning with calculated precision. His hand rested lightly on the metal gate, as if he already knew he'd be invited in. Michael didn't ask any questions, he simply bowed his head and opened the gate. The early afternoon air was dry and crisp, and every footstep across the courtyard rang out clearly. Rachel looked around, as if assessing the changes in the house she once shared with Michael, then glanced down at the small pair of sandals neatly arranged by the steps. In the living room, Emily Whitmore sat on a small wicker chair near the window, coloring in the book Ashley had loaned her. She flinched when she saw Rachel, but didn't run toward her or call out her name. Instead, her gaze settled, long and unmoving, on the man standing beside her mother. Michael calmly poured water into glasses for the guests. He offered no pleasantries. Rachel was the first to break the silence. "It's been a long time. I heard you came back from the north." Michael didn't respond. Rachel gave a faint smile, but her eyes didn't share it. Richard spoke with a soft, almost polished voice. "Thank you for taking care of Emily all this time. We truly appreciate it. But now that our family is stable, we'd like to bring her back with us." Emily set her colored pencil down, her eyes still fixed on Richard's face. She leaned against the wall, trying to shrink away. Michael placed the glass on the table. The sound it made was like a faint crack. "His family?" he asked. Rachel pressed her lips tightly together. Richard remained composed. "We've been living together for some time. She's Emily's biological mother, and I see her as my own daughter." Emily slipped behind the curtain. She didn't scream, but her legs trembled slightly and her hands tore at the hem of her dress. Michael didn't look at her, but he could feel it. He turned to Richard. "If you truly see her as part of your family, then you must know what she fears most." Richard leaned forward slightly, resting his hand on his knee. His voice dropped lower. "We're not here to cause trouble. We know the law favors blood ties, but we're practical people. If you really love the child, you should think about her long-term happiness." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and carefully placed it on the table. "Consider it support, a token of appreciation, if you allow us to take Emily without involving the courts." Michael didn't touch the envelope. He looked at Rachel. She avoided his gaze, discreetly tugging her sleeve down to cover her wrist. "You left your daughter in a locked room, without food, not even a note. You knew I'd come back, didn't you?" Rachel raised her head. Her eyes were no longer cold, but they held no remorse either. "I had no choice. At the time, I couldn't care for her. You loved me, Michael. You knew you'd do the right thing." Michael leaned back. His voice was calm. The right thing would have been not turning a child into emotional collateral. "You didn't come for her. You came for something you no longer deserve to have." Richard remained poised, but his fingers tapped faster on the table. "We're not pressuring you. We just hope this doesn't get messy. I'm sure you don't want the whole town involved in a trial." Michael stood. The envelope remained untouched on the table. He looked Richard in the eye. "If you believe justice is something to be bargained, I'm ready to prove that blood means nothing when a heart has withered." Rachel suddenly stood. She grabbed Richard's arm. "Let's go. No one here wants to hear reason." Before leaving, she paused, turned back, and said with biting sarcasm, "You're still the same, believing in things no one else does." Michael didn't answer. He simply closed the door behind them in silence. That night, Emily sat on the porch, hugging her knees, her back resting against the wooden pillar, eyes drifting into the still dark sky. Ashley brought 2 mugs of warm milk and handed her one. Lucia didn't say anything. She simply placed her hand on her foster sister's knee as the older girl sat down beside her. "Has anyone you loved ever abandoned you?" Marisol didn't answer right away. She looked out at the last orange glow on the horizon. "Yes, but over time I came to understand that sometimes people don't leave because they don't love you, but because they never learned how to stay." Lucia nodded in silence. Then she looked up. "But some people choose to stay, even when no one asks them to." Marisol smiled. She wrapped her arms around the little girl, raising her day by day through a quiet kind of pain that still held dignity. Across town, in the small office of the clinic, Dr. Evelyn Cole laid a file down in front of Michael. Rachel was charged with forging documents in Reno. The case was closed for lack of evidence, but the record is still there. Michael remained quiet, gently lowering his chin. "What about Richard?" "He's connected to a network that arranges fraudulent adoptions. I'm waiting on more details from Attorney James Carter." Michael stood, pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket, and unfolded the drawing Emily had made. A man standing between 2 women, one smiling, the other turning her back. "We can't let a girl learn how to love through fear." Evelyn nodded, her voice firm. "In life, there are doors that, if we don't close them ourselves, will stay open forever. And the wind, in any season, can make someone sick." Michael looked at her. His eyes remained fixed on the ceiling light, gently swaying. "This time, I'll close the door." The small room felt quieter than any other night. Light from the moon-shaped lamp cast a soft halo on the wall, flickering slightly with every breeze slipping through the cracked window. A faint scent of mint lingered in the air, the same one Evelyn left behind after placing a few drops of oil onto a damp cloth to cool Emily's forehead. Michael was still awake. He sat on the edge of the sofa, where the girl lay curled like a ball beneath a blanket. Her small legs barely moved as the fever rose, and her dry lips murmured words no one could understand. Her cheeks glowed with heat, contrasting with her pale mouth. A tiny hand rose in the middle of her feverish sleep, then fell beside her again. Her voice, broken and faint, echoed like a memory from far away. "Daddy, Daddy, don't leave me." Michael leaned closer. He didn't know if he was trembling or if the house itself was shaking from something unnamed. His hand rested gently on her back, warm but so light it didn't wake her. For years, he had heard the word daddy on the lips of children from border towns, but never had those two syllables carried such loss. No one teaches a child how to call out to a father who's been missing, just as no one teaches a father how to return from the dark and become the light again. When Emily opened her eyes, the sky was still dark. No roosters crowed, no hurried footsteps echoed down the street like on other mornings. Only silence covered everything, and Michael was still there, in the same place, unmoving. She looked at him. She said nothing. She simply looked, as if checking whether this man was real or just part of a dream not yet ended. Michael looked back. In that moment, there was no need to say a word. Sometimes adults have to learn how to be silent, to truly hear the questions left unspoken. Emily sat up a little, lifting her head from the pillow. Her voice was no longer hoarse like the night before, but soft as a breeze. "I dreamed of a man in green, standing under a big tree." Michael gave a quiet nod. "He looked like you, but felt like Dad." She didn't react. She didn't smile, didn't deny it. He just gently pulled the blanket around her and whispered, "Sometimes dreams know what we need more than our minds ever will." That afternoon, Ashley opened the door holding a carefully wrapped package. She was still in her school uniform, her hair in braids and her voice soft, as if afraid to break something fragile with her words. Emily sat on the front steps of the porch, still a bit weak, but her eyes were brighter than the day before. Seeing Ashley, she smiled and stood up shyly. "This is for you." Inside the package was a new dress, a simple peach-pink one with delicately embroidered daisy patterns along the hem. Emily ran her fingers over the fabric as if she were touching a memory she never had. "I think it'll fit you. My mom always said there's no dress more beautiful than the one someone gives you with love." Emily smiled. It was a rare smile on her small, prematurely serious face. She didn't say thank you. She just bowed her head slightly and ran back into her room. Michael stood just beyond the doorframe, still holding a cup of cold coffee. He didn't step out, and he didn't interrupt, but he had heard every word. And just as Emily spoke those words to Ashley, Michael's heart skipped a beat. Mom said, "If I was good, someone kind would come to rescue me. I think she was talking about you, Mr. Michael." That night, Michael stepped out into the garden. He stood alone, his back slightly hunched from age and the weight of everything he had carried. No one called him, no one expected him, but in that silence, he understood more clearly than ever that he was doing the right thing. Some people aren't born to be parents, but they can learn to love like one. Michael wondered if Rachel had ever thought about that when she left the girl behind, or if it was all just calculation. He didn't know, but he did know that Emily had started to trust him, and that scared him more than any war he had fought. That night, Emily asked him for permission to look for her box of crayons in the old chest. He nodded. She rummaged through the wooden trunk where he kept some pieces of his past. Suddenly, the rustle of paper caught her attention. Emily pulled out a photograph. Her eyes widened. Her fingers froze for a moment. It was a wedding photo. A young man in a green uniform, his expression unmistakably Michael's. Beside him stood a woman, her mother. Emily stared at the photo for a long time. She didn't scream. She didn't ask. She simply folded it carefully, placed it next to the crayon box, and slowly walked to the porch. Michael was still sitting in his chair, holding a book he never managed to finish. Emily sat down beside him. She didn't speak. Time passed, and then she exhaled slowly, as if sharing a quiet secret. "I think I should call him Papa if that's okay." Michael turned to her. He didn't answer right away. He simply reached out and rested his hand on her shoulder, so gently it left no trace. "Papa never gets angry when you call him Papa." Emily smiled, not because she was allowed to, but because she had finally found someone she could call Papa, not by law, but by heart. The wooden staircase in the small house made no sound, even though Emily had been sitting there since the amber light outside began to fade. She didn't move. She didn't ask. She didn't cry. Her legs stayed tucked in, her arms wrapped around her knees, her chin resting on the worn wool fabric of her pants. Her pale, delicate face was turned downward, where a wedding photo sat carefully placed on the table. No one had told her to do it, but when she saw the picture, Emily knew. She didn't need confirmation or explanation. In that soldier's eyes, she saw something no one else had ever shown her, something lasting, something that needed no proof, and wouldn't disappear when someone turned away. Michael Whitmore stepped into the room, his clothes still dusted from checking the hinges on the shed. He stopped when he saw the photo. It was no longer face down like the day before. It had been neatly folded and placed with care. There was no note, but the message was clear. Sometimes, silence echoes louder than words. Michael didn't need to guess. A sweet, aching sensation swelled in his chest, like rain falling into the cracks of an old mended roof. In the kitchen, Dr. Evelyn Cole placed the kettle on the iron stove, then turned back to a thin folder she had held onto for days. She left the room with her usual calm, but her eyes revealed a barely concealed unease. She placed the folder beside the wedding photo and simply said, "I think it's time." Michael nodded, as if those words had been waiting a long time to be said. He sat down, the light pouring through the window catching the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. Slowly, carefully, he opened the pages with his fingers, as if unfolding memories of his own. The first page was an official report from the city of Columbia Falls dated 2014. A 2-year-old girl was found in an abandoned motel room with no birth certificate and no guardian. She wore a blue floral dress, was mildly dehydrated, frightened but unharmed. A few pages later, in the same typeface, appeared a file from Dover in 2017, detailing a strikingly similar case. Michael clenched his hands. The numbers, the signatures, the stamps, each one like a blade of ice carving into memory. "Everything matched the timeline from when you were desperately searching for your daughter," Dr. Evelyn said, tapping the folder. "Rachel Langston told you she'd given her up for adoption because they were too poor." She pointed to the attachment, a blurry photo of Rachel seemingly taken by a local near the old school where Michael had once worked security right after leaving the military. She was here. Not just once. Mrs. Margaret Quinn also saw her wandering around the market, always silent, never asking for anything, never looking anyone in the eye. Michael turned the pages of the file on Richard Keller. The cold, impersonal letters revealed 3 suspicious adoption cases, involving forged documents and parental names that didn't match the official records. "They're part of a chain, Michael, and you weren't excluded because they forgot you, but because they didn't want you to exist in that story." Michael stood up and looked out toward the garden. The wildflowers Emily had planted weeks ago were swaying gently in the wind. She didn't know their names, only called them by their colors: purple flowers, orange flowers, blue flowers. But she cared for them every day, as if there was still room for hope, even if she didn't yet know where she belonged. Behind him, light footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. Emily stood at the kitchen doorway, her hand gripping the hem of her sweater. She slowly walked over, pulled out a chair, and sat across from him. Her gaze wasn't accusatory, nor was it empty. It was the look of someone young enough to be scared, but old enough to understand that the truth isn't always black or white. "I read it all," she said softly but clearly. Michael didn't respond right away. He held her gaze, as if trying to read which way that small heart was leaning. "I want to hear it from you, not from files or anyone else." He took a deep breath. For a moment, the kitchen felt smaller as he began to speak. "I didn't abandon you. I didn't forget you. But someone took you from my arms before I had the chance to bring you home." He wasn't telling a story. He was speaking a truth. He recalled the morning he left for service, how Rachel had seen him off at the door. The night before, they had fought. A week later, she sent a letter saying she'd moved out due to lack of resources. When he came home on leave, the house was empty. Some said she'd gone to the border with the girl. I searched for you everywhere, from one town to another, one shelter to the next, file after file, but every door stayed closed. Until you showed up in my dream, not as a face, but as a feeling. And then you walked into this house, into my life. Emily lowered her head. A tear dropped onto the back of her hand, but she didn't wipe it away. Michael raised his hand and gently touched her cheek. I'm not asking you to believe me right now. Just give me the chance to start again. Not from the beginning, but from today. Silence fell over them. Then, like the echo of a heartbeat, Emily looked up. Her voice was fragile but firm. If I called him that, would it change anything? Michael nodded, his eyes already red. It won't change the past, but it will change the future. Emily leaned in and wrapped her arms around his neck. It wasn't a long or tight embrace, but it meant everything, and she whispered, "Daddy." That word echoed through the kitchen like a dawn bell. No one responded, but everyone paused to listen. Outside, Mrs. Margaret Quinn was watering the plants. She heard the call, but didn't turn around. She just smiled into the breeze. Good people may lose their way, but their hearts always know how to return. What matters is that someone is waiting at the place they promised to meet, and this time someone was. He hadn't left. He hadn't complained. He just waited, like the earth waiting for the rain to return. A purple petal fell on the porch step, then another. Gently, but certainly, just like the word that had just bloomed in the kitchen, a new chapter was beginning, not made of events, but of truth. Rachel didn't look at him. She just exhaled slowly, as if each breath was her way of stretching time. Michael, though he had prepared for this meeting for days, felt his heart sink. The visitation room wasn't large, but the glass between them made the space feel vast. On the other side, Rachel remained silent. Her eyes bore the weight of time. The light was clear, but not warm. Everything in that place reflected a biting coldness, the kind of cold that fate had dealt them both. Michael didn't check the clock, nor did he seem in a hurry. He wasn't there to count minutes. He was there to untangle a knot that had been burning inside him for years. Rachel spoke first. Her voice was neither loud nor soft. It sounded simply like a tired confession. "Did you come for that girl or for me?" Michael answered without hesitation. "I came for both, but most of all, I came for Emily." Rachel gave a slight nod. It was the first sign that she no longer had the strength to argue, or perhaps she just no longer saw the point in doing so. "I wasn't a good mother," she began, her voice raspy as if she had once cried herself hoarse, "but at least I let her live, with someone who I knew wouldn't hurt her." Michael didn't react right away. He just nodded quietly. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't approval. It was a silent understanding. Rachel continued, twisting the hem of her uniform between her fingers. "You know, that day, I was watching from a distance, from the corner of the room. I saw you stop when the girl nearly collapsed. I saw you kneel down and lift her up like nothing had ever happened between us." Michael looked up. "I didn't know she was my daughter, but when I saw her eyes, I knew." Rachel pulled a crumpled envelope from her plastic purse. "I've kept this for years. It belonged to Mr. Thomas. He only wrote to me once." She slid the letter through the slot under the glass. It was a handwritten letter, the neat, disciplined script unmistakably that of Michael's father. Every stroke showed discipline, but also trust in the person receiving it. It told of a time long past when Rachel had been a young homeless woman living near the border, and Mr. Thomas had helped her by giving her a part-time job, paid her fairly, and asked no questions. Rachel softly recited a passage from memory. "Anyone can fall, but what matters is not dragging others down with them." Michael folded the letter carefully, as if closing a chapter of his own story. "My father believed in you," he said. Rachel looked over Michael's shoulder, her gaze lost as though searching through shattered memories. "I promised him I would become someone worthy, but everything slipped away. I don't even remember who I am anymore. And more than that, I don't know how to be a mother." Michael remained silent for a moment before replying gently, "Some promises can't be kept, but sometimes someone else can do the right thing for you." Rachel blinked several times, trying to hold back the thin layer of tears in her eyes. "I'm not asking you for anything, Michael. Just, if you can, give her a decent life. Protect her in the way I never knew how." Michael nodded. "I'm not here to judge you, but Emily deserves to know that love isn't supposed to hurt. That it's okay to love freely and to be loved without fear." For the first time, Rachel looked at him with resolve. "I lost my chance to be a good mother, but she still has a chance to be a happy child." Before standing up, she said one final thing: "Give her what I never had." Michael stood. He said nothing more, but as he walked away, he was no longer the hardened soldier. He was a father letting go of part of his past. On the way home, he didn't turn on the radio or look at the scenery. Everything was clear now. Rachel, the woman he once loved who vanished without a trace, was no longer someone he needed to reclaim. She was just a pause in the journey, a comma, not a period. When he arrived, Emily was in the garden, carefully folding a silk handkerchief shaped like a bird. Mrs. Margaret, standing behind her, gestured for silence when she saw Michael approaching. "I'm done," Emily called out, unaware that her father had just returned from a meeting he might never talk about. Michael sat beside her, picked up the handkerchief, and smiled. "You think it looks more like a butterfly than a bird?" Emily pouted. "No, Papa, look closely. These are the wings, and this is the tail." Michael nodded. "Then it's a bird that found its way back home." Emily didn't quite understand the meaning behind those words, but he did. A little bird had returned. Not Rachel, it was Emily, the little bird finally freed from her invisible chains. And he had returned too, not from the battlefield, but from his own doubts. Footsteps echoed gently down the long stone hallway. No heels, no sobs. The smell of polished wood mixed with archival dust seemed to freeze the air in place. It was a morning no one would talk about, but one everyone would remember. The Maple Ridge family court was modest in size, yet today something about the atmosphere made it feel larger than usual. A heavy silence settled over everyone, preparing to step across a threshold that had no return. Michael Whitmore gently placed his hand on Emily's back as the two of them entered the courtroom. She wore a simple blue dress that Ashley Bennett had picked out the night before, and her hair was tied with a white ribbon loaned to her by Mrs. Margaret Quinn. No one spoke on the way there. No one told Emily what to say or asked her to stay quiet. There was simply an understanding. They hadn't come to fight. They had come to acknowledge what their hearts already knew. On the left bench sat Rachel Langston, alone, her old handbag clutched tightly in her lap, her head bowed slightly, eyes downcast. Richard Keller was nowhere to be seen. Everyone noticed his absence, but no one mentioned it. The judge, an older man with silver-streaked hair, slowly turned through file after file. Not rushed, not cold. "This court is now in session," he said, his voice firm but not harsh. The first to stand was attorney James Carter. He briefly explained the grounds on which Michael Whitmore was seeking legal guardianship over the minor known as Emily Whitmore. No embellishment, no dramatics, only truth. Dr. Evelyn Cole handed over the medical and psychological reports. She described Emily's recovery as a remarkable journey, but she never used the word miracle, because it hadn't come from any higher power. It came from patience, unconditional love, and warm meals. When asked to speak, Rachel stood. Without an attorney by her side, her hands trembled as she smoothed her blouse. At first, her voice was shaky, but word by word, it grew steadier. "I relinquish my parental rights," she said, looking directly at the judge. A faint murmur stirred in the back of the room. Rachel lowered her head. No one asked for further explanation. The paperwork spoke for itself. A plainclothes officer entered the room and whispered something to a court staffer. The judge nodded and addressed the courtroom with gravity. "Richard Keller has been detained at the northern border. He faces preliminary charges for illegal adoption brokerage, identity fraud, and participation in a national child trafficking network. A separate trial will be held." Michael did not turn around. Emily looked up at him, her hand gripping the hem of his coat tightly. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The judge read the final decision. It didn't take long. She wasn't in a rush. Based on the documents, testimony, and evidence presented, this court grants full legal guardianship of the minor Emily Whitmore to Mr. Michael Whitmore, effective immediately. Silence. Then, a soft exhale escaped from Mrs. Quinn's chest, enough to make others around her smile gently in response. As they stepped out of the courtroom, Michael felt lighter than he ever had, even lighter than the day he'd taken off his uniform. Emily reached for his hand, holding it tightly as she asked, her eyes gleaming, "Can I go to school with your last name now?" Michael leaned down and brushed her hair back. "You can do anything you want. Starting today, you don't have to ask permission to be yourself anymore." She said nothing more. She just gripped his hand even tighter. Together, the small group descended the courthouse steps. The sun was up, but not hot. Wind passed through the eucalyptus trees flanking the walkway, rustling the loose pages on the community bulletin board. No one spoke of Richard's arrest. No one turned to watch Rachel exit through the rear door, her bag slung over her shoulder, never once looking back. Only Mrs. Quinn walked slowly, mumbling to herself as if speaking to the wind. "You can't always make up for the wrong you've done, but you also can't hide forever from the eyes of the child you turned away from." James Carter lit a cigarette, his first in months, not out of anxiety, but because some days, when it's all finally over, you need something to remind you that you're still alive. Dr. Evelyn Cole handed Emily a small book titled Mountain Animals to Color. Emily flipped through a few pages, then looked up. "Doctor, can I draw a fox too? I think I'm like a fox, always running, always scared of the light." Dr. Cole nodded. "But now it's come out of the cave, hasn't it?" Emily thought for a moment before answering. "Yes, but it's still learning to run in a straight line, not in circles." Michael looked at Evelyn. Their eyes met for a second. Nothing else needed to be said. You don't need a legal document to call someone family, but sometimes that piece of paper is what keeps a child from ever feeling lost again. Out in the courthouse courtyard, others still waited for divorce hearings, land disputes, and problems that never seemed to find solutions. But in that moment, at the heart of it all, a little girl had just received a new name and a piece of paper that said she belonged. Some relationships don't need ink or stamps, but for a child, knowing there's a document that says, "You're home now," can turn a dream into something real. And some summers don't begin with the sound of cicadas or the taste of ripe mangoes. They begin on a quiet morning when a little girl calls someone dad for the very first time, and no one has to ask her to. But among those old wooden benches, a 6-year-old girl had just received a new name and a document stating she no longer had to fear being abandoned. Some bonds don't need ink or seals, but for a child, having a piece of paper that says, "You belong here," can turn dreams into certainty. Some summers don't begin with the sound of cicadas or the sweetness of ripe mangoes, but with a quiet morning where a little girl calls someone dad for the first time without being prompted. In the small backyard of the brick house in Maple Ridge, Oregon, sunlight filtered through the leaves of a lemon tree, casting delicate beams over the still damp ground. Emily Whitmore was crouched beside a few clay pots that Ashley Bennett had cleaned the evening before. Her hands were covered in soil, bangs hanging messily over her forehead, but her eyes were bright and serious, as if she were doing something far more important than what her 6 years suggested. Ashley stepped out of the house with a bag of seeds she'd just bought at the market. She sat down beside the girl without saying a word and handed her a small handful. "Are these beans?" Emily asked, lifting each seed like it was a treasure. "Beans, carrots, and carnations," Ashley replied softly. "They need soft soil, plenty of light, and someone patient to take care of them." "I'll be patient," the little girl said, not like she was making a promise, but like she was offering one. Ashley smiled without saying anything more. The child stared at her small hands, planting the seeds as if she were sowing lost pieces of her own history. Michael Whitmore stepped out the back door, holding a bundle of blank paper and an old wooden pencil. The breeze tugged gently at his cotton shirt, mingling the scent of soap with the clean morning air. He didn't speak. He simply sat on the chair next to Emily and began carefully folding the paper. Emily looked at him, her eyes lighting up. "Are we making paper planes today, Dad?" Michael nodded casually. He flattened the first sheet, folding it precisely as if he were passing down a memory. "When I was in the Army, I used to fold paper planes at night. Not for fun, but to write down the things I couldn't say. Then I'd let them fly into the wind." "Did anyone ever find them?" the girl asked. Michael smiled, a warm, quiet smile. "No one. But that wasn't the point. What mattered was when I wrote them down, I realized my heart was still alive." Emily hugged the little paper plane to her chest without saying a word. After a moment, she asked softly, "Daddy, what does the name Whitmore mean?" Michael paused. He placed the pencil on the table. Whitmore is the name of someone who survived. But not all survivors are strong. You know how to love, and you know how to forgive. That's what makes you special. Emily didn't reply, but her expression softened. She picked up the pencil and began writing her name in an old notebook. The first letters were clumsy, but her eyes lit up as if the name was no longer strange to her, but part of who she was. At the top of the page, she wrote, "Emily Whitmore," and stared at it in silence for a long while. That afternoon, Michael took her to his study. They sat together, and he read to her in his warm, steady voice. It wasn't a fairy tale, but a true story about a wounded soldier who got separated from his unit and survived because a stray cat brought him scraps of food every night. Emily asked, "Did he ever see the cat again?" Michael replied, "No, but whenever he thought of the cat, he never felt alone again." That night, Emily made a picture frame out of popsicle sticks Michael had found at the market. Inside it, she placed the first photo they took together, a photo where they didn't smile much, but their eyes conveyed a sense of peace. Next to the frame was a folded letter written in pencil on an old sheet of notebook paper. "Mom, I'm not angry anymore. I forgive you, but I choose to stay with the person who truly loves me." No one knew when she had written it. The next morning, Ashley found it while tidying the bed. She stood in silence for a long time before walking away, eyes full of tears. On another day, Emily went to the market with Mrs. Margaret Quinn. The girl was busy chalking prices on the blackboard when a customer approached, bent down, and gently asked, "What's your name, sweetheart?" Emily straightened up and answered clearly, "My name is Emily Whitmore." The woman smiled warmly. "That's a beautiful name, like a summer moon, warm but not blinding." From a distance, Michael watched her. He didn't come any closer. He simply stood amid the crowd, holding a bag of vegetables, never taking his eyes off his daughter. There was nothing extraordinary in that gaze, and yet it held everything a father could hope for: gratitude that she was still here, and hope that from now on, no one would ever dare hurt her again. That night, before dinner, Emily asked, "If I had a big garden, I could grow anything I wanted, right, Papa?" Michael nodded. "Of course you could. Then I'd grow good people," she said, "so they could grow up and help kids like me." Her answer silenced the entire table. Mrs. Margaret nodded, Ashley smiled, her lips pressed together, and Michael simply sniffed softly before serving her another slice of roasted squash. No one ever warns you when a moment changes your life. Sometimes it's nothing more than pencil lines on paper, a few smudged colors still drying, or the faint outline of a hand drawn with extraordinary care. Emily Whitmore sat quietly on a wooden bench by the window, her eyes focused on a drawing pinned to the wall, where familiar shapes were beginning to take form under her pencil. The drawing, though still clumsy, had the power to quiet even the oldest hearts. A man in uniform stood at the center, his right hand clasping that of a smiling girl looking up at him, his left hand holding that of a woman with long hair and a white coat. Beside the girl, an elderly woman with silver hair and a gentle smile leaned slightly forward. On the other side, a younger woman with determined eyes held a bundle of books. 5 people, 5 separate heartbeats, all connected by one simple line: their joined hands. Ashley Bennett was the first to notice the drawing. She said nothing, just pulled up a chair beside Emily and carefully helped trim the edge of the page. She asked softly, "Why did you place Mrs. Margaret here?" Her finger pointed to the bottom left corner of the picture. Emily looked up and replied in a quiet voice, "Because she's always near the kitchen. I want her to see everyone from where she sits." Michael Whitmore had just reached the bedroom door when he froze in place. From his angle, the figure of the man in uniform stood out clearly, as if silently watching him through pencil lines. There was no smile on her face, just a calm posture and eyes shaded in ash gray that squeezed Michael's heart. There were no names or labels, but he recognized himself in the figure Emily had drawn. In her eyes, he was the one who stayed, the place you return to when there's nowhere else to hold on to. The sun had just dipped behind the distant hills, leaving a faint amber hue streaming through the kitchen window. It wasn't raining, but the breeze was cool enough to make Mrs. Margaret's aging hands tremble slightly as she cut the flan. On the table sat a carefully zipped pink backpack, beside new books still fragrant with ink, a color-coded box of crayons, and a silver nameplate. Emily Whitmore. Ashley didn't mention what had happened the night before, when Emily had run from her room after dreaming of her birth mother. She hadn't screamed, she had only wept silently, and when Michael approached and quietly placed a hand on her shoulder, she whispered between shaking breaths, "I'm afraid that if I love everyone here too much, my mom will disappear forever." Michael didn't respond, he only held her. From that day on, Emily never spoke of her mother again, but that same morning when he rewrote his poem in a small notebook, the first line appeared in strong, confident script. "Dear Dad." The drums echoed like the heartbeat of the town on that special morning, as the doors of Maple Ridge Elementary swung open to welcome the tiny feet of a new day. Sunlight flooded the courtyard as the children lined up neatly, their shoes brushing against the cement in a rhythm both innocent and precise. Michael stood beneath the trees, hands in his pockets, not stepping closer. Ashley stood beside him, holding a camera she hadn't yet raised. A little further off, Mrs. Margaret sat on a bench beside the doctor. Dr. Evelyn Cole spoke softly, as if sharing a secret only those who had lived more than half a century could truly understand. The white and blue uniform Emily was wearing was brand new, but a bit loose, the hem brushing near her knees. Her shoes, though worn, still shone under the lights. When her name echoed through the loudspeaker, the principal's voice was as gentle as a breeze gliding through the hallway. Emily gripped the piece of paper in her hands and slowly stood up. Each step toward the podium felt like a heartbeat, trembling but determined. There are people who didn't bring me into this world, but they taught me how to rise when no one expected me to. They never asked me to love them, they just stayed. Silence fell over the entire courtyard, not because the poem was too profound, but because its simplicity held a painful truth. A truth that didn't invite instant applause. A truth that didn't invite instant applause. Michael looked up. His eyes, wet with emotion, didn't shed a single tear. He had spent years in silence, believing that pain was a scar meant to keep us from forgetting. But now, that girl, his girl, had, with one line of poetry, gently healed that wound. Emily stepped down from the podium. No one said a word. Then, a boy in the last row began to clap. The applause spread like wind stirring through palm trees, steady, sincere, and needing no cue. That afternoon, from the second-floor balcony, Emily waved a bouquet of flowers someone had given her. Michael was polishing his old leather shoes when he heard the girl call out, "Dad, hurry up! I don't want to be late for my first day as your daughter." He looked up. A slow smile crept across his face. He didn't say a word, folded the rag, stood and stepped through the door, not to say goodbye, but to walk beside her. And then, like a familiar whisper, the church bells rang that afternoon, weaving through the rooftops of the town like Laurel Valley, taking a long, deep breath to end the day. They rang not for any ceremony, but like a gentle tap on the heart, a reminder that sometimes what binds us most isn't blood, but the decision to stay. Emily didn't know her drawing had moved the teachers so deeply that the principal had requested to copy and proudly hang it in the school's main hallway. Beneath the picture, someone had written in simple, slanted handwriting, "Family, the place we choose to stay." Summer arrived late in Maple Ridge that year. The bougainvillea by the house had just begun to bloom, and the breeze felt lighter. as if the whole town had learned to breathe more slowly so as not to awaken things still quietly healing. Michael Whitmore hung a small wooden sign on the door of his new workshop, Whitmore & Co. Woodcraft and Memory. On the windowsill, a potted cactus with a soft purple blossom decorated the entrance, a gift from Emily for their 10th birthday together. That girl was now a 16-year-old young woman. Her hair was long, her skin pale, her eyes deep and serene, and her voice, once trembling, now rang like twilight bells, clear, warm, and steady. "I'm heading out, Dad," she said, slinging a backpack over her shoulder and hugging a stack of sketch papers. "Today I'm presenting on someone who inspires me." Michael nodded without asking a single question. He just watched her disappear beyond the iron gate, his heart suddenly quiet. He knew the name she would mention in that classroom. Wouldn't be his. It would be the painting of Mrs. Margaret Quinn, who had passed away the previous winter after a heart attack, leaving behind an empty kitchen chair and the scent of flawn no one could ever quite recreate. The painting Emily had made that year still hung in the living room, though now it had 2 new acrylic details: a gray cat curled up on a cushion, Gato, the companion Margaret left behind, and a tiny dot on the girl's finger, symbolizing a future ring only she understood. Michael stepped into the kitchen. He opened a cabinet and took out an old hardcover notebook, the one where Emily had written her very first poem. The first page still bore the faint smudge of ink. Dad, the one who simply stayed. He didn't read it again. He simply ran his hand gently across the paper. 10 years may be enough to heal a wound, but never enough to forget. Only when we learn to live with our memories do they stop being a burden and become roots. From the playground, the school bell rings again. Emily is living a new life, not because someone saved her, but because someone chose to stay. Sometimes in life, all it takes is one person who decides to stay, to change the destiny of a child. The story of Emily and Michael is not a fairy tale. It's a slice of real life, stitched together with pain, forgiveness, and unconditional love. A father who returned in silence, not demanding to be called Dad, but simply wanting to protect his daughter from a distance. A girl who had been rejected, hungry and hurt, but who finally found the strength to say in a steady voice what her heart had always longed for. "I've decided to stay." We saw goodness in this story: Mrs. Margaret Quinn, Dr. Evelyn Cole, Ashley Bennett, people who shared no blood but opened their arms without asking for anything in return. And we also saw those who did harm: Rachel Langston and Richard Keller, who used power and cruelty to crush a girl who had no way to defend herself. But justice, even when delayed, always arrives right on time. That's the message we want to share with you. Those who hurt others will be held accountable, and those who love will be rewarded. And something even more important: family is not just where we are born, but where we are chosen and loved. Dear friends, after watching this story, was there a moment that touched your heart? Have you ever met a stranger who made you feel at home? Have you ever wanted someone to stay simply because you felt safe when they were near? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. I read every word and I cherish every word, because this channel is not just a place for stories. It's a warm corner where we listen and heal together. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story.